Good evening and welcome to BATV News. I'm Andrew Laidley. Civil servants will be the first group to be introduced to the government's National Identification System, NIDS. That's according to the technical team at a press conference this morning. However, the pilot, which should take effect in January 2019, may be delayed. The controversial bill was passed in the Senate last night after 2 marathon sittings of the upper house. Anthony Morgan reports.
After another marathon session on Monday, the Senate passed the National Identification and Registration Bill with some 168 amendments. However, opposition senators did not vote in favor of the bill. So what's next for NIDS? Acting Chief Technical Director at the Office of the Prime Minister, Jacqueline Lynch Stewart, says the technical team is working to have the system implemented, but she says that is dependent on how quickly the bill becomes law. She says a pilot project is slated to begin in January 2019, but that timeline may be pushed back as a result of the delays in getting the legal framework in place. The bill is to return to the lower house for more consideration. If passed, it will then go to the Governor General for his consent to become law.
We will have to now go back and even see if January 2019 is realistic for the pilot. So we may even have to push it back by maybe 1 or 2 months. But let us assume, because we haven't yet had that discussion, let us assume that the implementation plan remains as it is. The first enrollment will be January 2019 for the pilot. But we do not want or do not plan to have that start without the law being in place and the regulations. So the next major activity for us in terms of the law is the regulations.
Meanwhile, the technical team says civil servants will be used in the pilot, which is expected to run for 9 months. Mrs. Lynch Stewart says that group was deliberately chosen. She adds that the majority of the population will be enrolled over a 3-year period.
Public sector employees are stationed island-wide, so it gives us a good feel of how to enroll people island-wide. Public sector employees are also a good reflection of our communities because we have different income groups within the public sector. So we felt it was a good pilot to give us, because as you can appreciate, if you're doing anything like this, you want to do a pilot to learn, to tweak, to fix before you go in a national rollout.
The entire project is to cost some $68 billion and will be funded with a loan from the Inter-American Development Bank. In the meantime, NIDS Project Director Warren Vernon says most of the money will be used to upgrade the government's ICT infrastructure and to put in the relevant security systems.
Over 70% of that budget will be used to upgrade the government of Jamaica data center, which is eGov, all of the various MDAs, providing connectivities, ensuring that the relevant security systems are in place, ensuring that the processes are in place, and ensuring that the enrollment centers, we intend to have about 43 enrollment centers across the island, that those enrollment centers will be modified, will be configured in such a way that will cater for the entire population, persons with disabilities.
For BATV News, I'm Anthony Morgan.
Meanwhile, the NIDS project director confirmed that the new system will become a one-stop ID, but he says it will run concurrently with other IDs in the initial stages. Nordia Francis Williams reports.
Director of Communications at the Office of the Prime Minister, Robert Morgan, says the National Identification System is aimed at streamlining the multiplicity of identification documents in the country.
NIDS is trying to create a framework where every single Jamaican has a secure, verifiable identification, starting with a NIN, which is a national ID number, and then eventually when you reach a particular age with a national ID card. The difference between a national ID that we are proposing and all that currently exists is verification.
However, NIDS Project Director Warren Vernon says this doesn't mean citizens will have to throw away their other cards immediately when the new system is implemented. He says NIDS will eventually become a one-stop tool to identify persons when conducting business.
Some of the IDs that you are using now, until those entities that you interact with would have cut over to this new system, you will still have to maintain those. So for a while, as part of the adoption process, a number of those IDs will run concurrently until we have the majority of the population in the system. Because there's no way the government would want to implement on day one and to say, you have to use this ID when the majority of the population is not yet enrolled. So we envisage that over a 3 years period, then you will have the majority of the population enrolled.
Additionally, Robert Morgan says the new system will not make the Electoral Commission of Jamaica redundant.
What is going to have to happen is, from a policy perspective, stakeholders, government, opposition, independent members of the ECJ and all of that are going to have to make a decision when this national ID thing becomes effective and when it has proven itself. Where is the evolution of the electoral identification process going to go?
For BATV News, I'm Norda Francis Williams.
Marijuana business owners will have a hard time getting a loan for conducting financial transactions with banks. Company Secretary and General Manager of the Group Legal and Compliance Division at NCB, Dave Garcia, says banks are answerable to correspondent banking partners who very often do not approve of marijuana-related businesses. More in this report. While the Cannabis Licensing Authority (CLA) has sanctioned the cultivation of marijuana in Jamaica for medical use, some licensees may still find it difficult to conduct financial transactions with banks, not only because of restrictions in local bank policy, but also because of correspondent banking regulations.
This is a fairly complicated issue. In terms of the correspondent banking relationships, I think one of the things that we have to appreciate is that where federal law in the United States prohibits certain activities, it means that the correspondents with whom we deal are not going to be able to facilitate it at all. So it's not just a matter of giving comfort to us, it's a matter of giving comfort to all the persons who are necessary to facilitate our business. So that's the starting point for us. So that rules out a certain segment of transactions. It means that foreign currency transactions, varying from wires to drafts to just holding a foreign currency account with us or exchanging currency, are going to be things that we would not be able to facilitate even if it fell within our own risk appetite.
Mr. Garcia says NCB held discussions with the CLA and correspondent banks to examine the issues.
Now, we have been pretty active in having dialogue with our correspondents and with the CLA on this. I think it was February or March of this year. In February of this year, we actually invited both the CLA and one of our leading correspondents to come in for meetings with for training and meetings with our board and with senior officers of the organization, so we could have some discussions and explore exactly what were the opportunities that were available at this time.
He says the discussions revealed that getting correspondent banks on board to facilitate marijuana-related businesses will not be easy.
And the truth is, to be candid, coming out of those discussions, it seemed reasonably clear to us that it was going to be difficult to move early and quickly in this area. Now, from a risk assessment standpoint, we did note that the CLA has outlined very detailed procedures that they employ and that the legislation and regulatory framework requires in relation to the assessment and monitoring of marijuana-related businesses. And so that's something which I think augurs well for the future. And this is something that we have under continuous assessment. We are still actively looking at the issue, and particularly in relation to J-dollar services.
Meanwhile, Mr. Garcia says NCB is not opposed to doing business with marijuana operators, but the approval process will be robust and it will take into consideration correspondent banking stipulations.
The position within the organization at this time is that if we are to do business with a marijuana-related business, it requires a pretty high level of approval and review for us to proceed. and we will proceed very cautiously, bearing in mind not just the risks, but also how we know our correspondents see it.
For BATV News, I'm Andrew Laidley. Still to come, Grace Kennedy revenues soar by $2 billion. And is local production of corned beef still on the cards for the company? We'll find out after the break. Welcome back. The Grace Kennedy Group is reporting revenues of $69.3 billion for the 9-month period ending September. The figure represents an increase of over $2 billion when compared to the 2016 corresponding period. The announcement was made during an investor briefing at the company's office on Monday. Anthony Morgan reports.
Grace Kennedy CEO Don Webby says the group results for the period under review was satisfactory, with revenues increasing. Revenues for the 9-month period stood at $69.3 billion, an increase of $2.6 billion.
Both periods we had one-off items, or what we describe as non-recurring gains. For the period of 2016, you recall on our audited accounts, we reported a liquidation gains of $567 million. And in 2017, unaudited, we are reporting a one-off gain of $418.5 million, which is a result of the Consumer Brands Limited acquisition.
Meanwhile, Group Chief Financial Officer Frank James says 3 out of 4 segments recorded growth, with insurance declining. He says net profits increased by $51.4 million. This was attributed to strong third-quarter results, which saw profits increasing by 57%, reaching $3.75 billion.
Third quarter net profit alone, it grew by $568 million, or 57%, inclusive of $455 million in non-recurring gains, of which the majority of that relates to a gain on acquisition of Consumer Brands, as Don mentioned. And also, we continued our efforts at liquidating non-operating subsidiaries for efficiency in the group, and that also contributed to the non-recurring gains in 2017.
Mr. James says the largest contributor to profits was the food segment, contributing some $2.1 billion.
Both in our Jamaican market as well as our international markets, with Jamaica actually growing fast at 5% versus 3% for our international markets. As Don indicated, we're particularly pleased with the growth of our Jamaican market against the background of the ban on corned beef. And it really demonstrates the resilience and robustness of our foods portfolio, where other products have been able to more than compensate for the reduction in corned beef sales. We also had the addition of our high-low Ligani store for the full 9 months, which has continued to drive revenue growth for high-low and for the domestic market.
In the meantime, the CFO says international markets also saw mixed results.
Business where our lower sales of nourishment or milk-based drink resulted in lower revenue for our UK foods business. This was more than offset, however, by very strong performance from our Canadian business, which was up 14% with double-digit growth in Walmart, and we have started, as Don mentioned, our growth into Western Canada. We also saw good growth for our U.S. food business, delivering 7% growth, with both the Grace and Lafayette brands growing revenue.
For BATV News, I'm Anthony Morgan.
Meanwhile, Don Webby says Grace Kennedy's corned beef sales are recovering. He says the group is also making some progress in efforts to produce corned beef locally. Here's more.
In March, the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries imposed a temporary import ban on corned beef out of Brazil amidst a rotten meat scandal. That ban prompted local distributors, including Grace Kennedy, to remove corned beef from shelves pending internal and external investigations on Brazilian suppliers. The ban was lifted in April after it was confirmed that Brazilian corned beef suppliers to Jamaican distributors were adhering to international health standards. Fast forward 8 months and Grace Kennedy CEO Don Webby is reporting that sales for the product are picking up.
I think what is very encouraging for us is that despite the significant fall off in the corned beef sales, and we are still at about 40% of where we were the previous year, we are showing growth in revenue. The corned beef factor really affected us in Jamaica and in the Caribbean. What I'll say is that we have put in place the strategic marketing plans to ensure that we recover in terms of corned beef revenue, and we are seeing over the period that we are in fact recovering in terms of corned beef revenue.
Mr. Webby says he has also received confirmation that the company is able to produce corned beef locally.
I had commissioned an internal project team to come back to me with a position within 6 months, which they delivered, and they in fact got technical advice on the matter. And basically what is showing is that we have the capacity to produce corned beef in Jamaica and meet the needs and the supply chain of the Grace Kennedy group of companies.
He says the first taste test was conducted with consumers last week, but he admits that going forward, it will be challenging to maintain local production.
I was just advised on Friday that there was a taste test done by on the local corned beef, and the feedback from our consumers or the people participating in this taste test was fantastic. They thought it was a great product. But here's the challenge. The challenge is that the cost of producing local corned beef because of the supply of local beef is going to be very challenging, and that is what we are trying to work through as a team. What I would say, based on what I have seen in terms of the report, this is going to call for a national effort in terms of production of beef to supply.
For BATV News, I'm Leroy Hall.
Business Access Television has signed a contract with the Jamaica Stock Exchange to provide Jamaicans with the latest updates on business news and information on the stock market. The contract was signed this afternoon at the offices of the Jamaica Stock Exchange. More in this report. Business Access TV's managing director Garth Walker says local businesses will benefit the most from the agreement the company signed with the Jamaica Stock Exchange on Tuesday.
Exposure. We're a media entity, so exposure is bringing their product, their services, their price, their trades to the wider audience. And the other aspect of the relationship is that we're going to be carrying the trades live with the ticker on the channel in the near future.
Meanwhile, Managing Director at the Jamaica Stock Exchange, Marlene Street Forrest, says it's all about strengthening partnerships to reach more investors.
The Stock Exchange will use the services of BATV to broaden the reach of the exchange to our investors, and likewise BATV will use our content to again provide information to the investing public. We think it is a good collaboration. It has started. It's not just about signing an agreement, but we have started to work together, and we have already seen the fruits of this contract.
The BATV-JSE partnership is expected to create new forms of revenue for both parties.
We will also look at dealing with other revenue streams. We are not going to divulge everything here, but obviously there are revenue streams that we see that we can both benefit from, and we'll be working together to ensure that that happens.
For BATV News, I'm Andrew Laidley. Stay with us. Regional and international stories are next. Welcome back. It's time for regional and international news. Caribbean Airlines Limited has received a harsh review from a Trinidad and Tobago Joint Select Committee of Parliament. The committee's chairman, David Small, described as mind-blogging the information coming out of an inquiry into the airline's operation. The inquiry revealed discrepancies ranging from pilots abusing travel privileges to standard routes seeing a worsening decline in passenger numbers. CNews Live's Janine Brown has more.
Several operational practices within Caribbean Airlines Limited have raised a few eyebrows amongst the members in Parliament's Joint Select Committee. Key among the concerns, pilots abusing their travel privileges.
We requested from the company a schedule showing how many jump seats for trips were taken by pilots for personal use. And as we reported previously, there was more than one individual who ran up very high numbers. We couldn't understand how could one man make 100 free jump seat personal trips a year. 100. I mean, when do you work?
The committee recommends instead that the first 20 jump seats used for personal reasons be deducted from the employee's annual allocation of free travel, after which an additional 20 flights max can be accessed. CAL is also being advised to reconsider some of its standard routes to North American destinations, as records show a continuous decline in passenger numbers.
Where over the past 5 years, there have been unabated trend of declining passenger numbers and massive financial losses.
Chairman David Small says that this reality should serve as a clarion call for management to address the matter within the JSE's recommended time of 3 months.
I have masses of information, and we won't put the exact numbers out there, but the losses the Caribbean Airlines have suffered on some of these routes in the past 5 years are massive losses.
Additionally, the JSE says it is peeved by CAL's hiring of foreign pilot staff when there is a clear abundance of local professionals who can do the job.
We have enough there, lots of pilots that we're aware of who are qualified and trained, can't get a job at Caribbean Airlines. Why are they advertising internationally for pilots? So this was an issue that particularly peeved this committee when, by their own admission, when they sought pilots locally, there was an abundant supply.
The committee did derive, however, that the company seems to have a strong brand loyalty despite its several shortcomings. It recommends this be utilized to steer the company back to profitability. Janine Brown, CNews.
Venezuela has been declared in default by the ratings agency Standard & Poor's after missing a deadline for 2 interest payments worth $200 million. The news came after Caracas called a meeting of creditors to discuss its debt. Here's more.
The ratings agency Standard & Poor's says that Venezuela is now in default after failing to make interest payments worth $200 million. The S&P has designated the country in selective default, which means it does expect it to make payments on some of its obligations in the future. Nevertheless, the agency believes there's a 1 in 2 chance of another default in the next 3 months. This news coming after Caracas held a meeting with investors on Monday. They'd been hoping to hear how Venezuela planned to avoid defaulting on a $60 billion bond. Instead, the vice president chose to blame the United States for its financial problems.
This assault has come from the U.S. government as well as parts of the Venezuelan opposition. They have finished off with the few remaining ways that Venezuela still had to develop extensively within the international financial market. Today, Venezuela is limited in seeking finance from what has historically been our market, and we are finding ourselves with the need to propose new formulas to overcome this complexity.
French workers at General Electric are expressing concern over reorganization at the firm. More in this report.
Alstom, lying in the shadow of its new owner, General Electric. Its energy branch was snapped up by the American giant in 2015, and it was targeted by its new CEO when he took over this summer, saying that its French subsidiary had fallen below expectations. But 2 years ago, General Electric said it would take on 1,000 new workers before the end of 2018, a promise that has proved difficult to keep. The group has already forecasted that within a month they would get rid of 345 posts at their site in Grenoble. With GE struggling, striking workers fear even bigger job losses are to come.
If tomorrow there is a reduction in the number of posts globally, we are certain we'll be the first to be hit. So this will add to the pressure that the site is already experiencing, that's for sure.
GE's French subsidiary isn't alone in facing an uncertain future. The group is going through a tough time. Its shares have lost 37% of their value since the start of the year, and thousands of job cuts are planned around the world.
Talking Stocks is after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's time now for Talking Stocks. 46 stocks traded today, of which 16 advanced, 20 declined, and 10 traded firm. The main JC index declined by 1,670 points to close at 290,958. The junior index also declined by 28 points to close at 2,948. Over 19 million units traded, valued at more than $227 million on the Jamaican dollar market. And on the US dollar market, over 1,000 units traded, valued at $323 US. Supreme Ventures, with over 13 million units changing hands, accounted for 71% of the market volume. Cable and Wireless was second with 1.5 million units trading. Sagicor Group accounted for over 1 million units, amounting to less than 5% of the market volume, crossing the floor. Proven Investments was a top advancer, up 3 cents to close at 24 cents, followed by Cable and Wireless Jamaica up 10 cents to close at $1.08. And Mayberry Investments up 47 cents to close at $5.45. The main decliners were Alaska Distributors down 45 cents to close at $5.48, followed by Supreme Ventures losing 73 cents to close at $11 and a cent, and Burrito Investments down 55 cents to close at $8.30. And that's the news for this evening. But before we go, a recap of our top story. The government says the pilot phase of the National Identification System NIDS will begin in January 2019. The pilot will include only civil servants and will run for 9 months. Thanks for watching. For more content, visit our website at batvja.com. I'm Andrew Lately. Pleasant viewing.